All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about flipping properties. Today, I want to cover just the basics with you. There are a number of topics that I could go into, that I will go into, but I could do probably a training on each and every single one of these. Today, some of the things we're going to cover is the basic terminology of flipping properties, how to find deals, how to run the numbers on deals. That includes both the after repair value, which is the sales price, and the renovation costs. I'll give you some tips on estimating reno costs. We're going to go through what I'll call some management rules from when you're actually working on the flip itself. We'll talk stages of construction. We'll talk about some pitfalls that you want to avoid when you're either buying a property or actually in the process of flipping the property. We'll, of course, talk about some ways to win with the flip process. I'm going to run you through an example deal really quickly. And then we'll talk about scaling a true flipping business, and I'll give you some additional resources. So before we jump too far into things today, I want to give just a little bit of backstory on who I am and what I've been up to. Name's Lou Raven. I've been in real estate in one way or another for about 8 years. Back in 2013, I bought my first 2 rental properties. I got the bug from listening to podcasts from Bigger Pockets, which a lot of people are familiar with. And I kind of cut my teeth just by learning, from different podcasts and books and things like that. In July 2018, I realized that I had built up a little bit of a business through multiple rental properties, and real estate was my true passion at that point. So I was able to make my hobby my full-time job. I quit my safe corporate job, got licensed, and jumped into real estate full-time. So it's been about 3 years full-time. In 2019, I found my home with the right real estate team and got the right training I needed to really launch my sales career. That year, I sold 32 homes, which included a $1 million FSBO listing, for sale by owner listing. And that year, I did about $9.85 million in sales. I was pretty upset that I missed 10 million by 150K, but that's all right. 2020, by that time, I had sold 72 properties. I'd done 18 personal deals by the end of 2020, and I was coaching 7 agents. I started building a 54-unit condo building with a couple partners that I have at CT Investor Group. Shameless plug, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at CT Investor Group. We're doing some pretty cool things there and really documenting that process of building a ground-up condo building. And then as of September 21, I've done 23 personal deals. Right now I have 18 rental units. I've kind of bought and sold a couple along the way. I coach 14 agents, and we're still building that 54 condo unit building. What is flipping properties? We're going to hop right into it. Flipping properties is, simply put, it's the process of buying, renovating, and reselling a property to earn a profit. I'll say it's very rewarding. It's great to buy and beautify a property, but at the end of the day, it's all about the numbers. This is a business, and you have to really be looking at it from the business lens, not just the wanting to restore and beautify a property if you want to do well and make money doing it. A quick word on flipping. Flipping properties is not real estate investing. People sometimes get surprised when I say this, but the IRS views it as active income and not passive income. It's taxed like your normal ordinary income on your tax return. So just like your W-2 job or your sales business. I say that because while it is, it's a very good, valid income generating activity. It's not what I would consider true investing, which is something that's sort of a passive action. So we buy flip houses in order to buy rentals, which we renovate and keep for long-term cash flow. And that's what I really call the basis of my real estate investing. I'll give a quick word on rental properties, and I do teach a whole class on this, a whole other topic. Rental properties would be considered true investments. Some of their benefits are passive cash flow, you have tax write-offs, you're paying down a loan, so you're increasing your principal and increasing your equity position in the property. You have price appreciation, which simply is price growth. And rental properties can also be a really good hedge for inflation, especially as we're heading into sort of a high inflation market right now. That's an important way to protect your wealth. If you have 100 grand that's in a bank account, that's actually becoming less valuable over time as we're in a 5% interest rate environment. 5% inflationary environment, whereas rental properties in general will keep up with inflation. At the end of the day, though, when it comes to buying rental properties, cash flow is king, and that's the metric you should always be looking for. Like I said, that's a whole other seminar. and I'll be happy to post that at some point. Quick word on some other types of investment properties within real estate investing. The next asset class is simply called commercial properties, and that's sort of the catch-all. So commercial properties include office space, retail space, industrial, medical, hotels, golf courses, marinas, boat yards, all that stuff would simply fall into a different asset class that's called commercial properties, and that's another type of real estate investing. But we're going to hop back to flipping properties, and we're going to stay there for the rest of this time. I want to first start off by giving you some terminology. These are words that are really important to know if you're going to be in the business. And whether that's as an agent, working with other flippers, or working with contractors, or working with other agents, you need to know a couple general terms. The first one is MAO. That's the maximum allowable offer. We'll define what that is in a little bit, but it is pretty obvious, I think, by the name. The next one is ARV. That's the after repair value. So that's the price that you plan to sell the property for once you're done with the rehab. There's something called a hard money lender. I jokingly wrote they're your new master. They're sort of, I don't want to call them loan sharks, but they are people that will loan you money to do a flip property at high interest rates. So that's what enables us to buy most of our deals with cash, so we can write cash offers. But on the back end, we're really paying a pretty high interest rate to these people, these lenders, and their whole job is funding renovations. GC, very common term in construction, that's the general contractor. And then the SOW, often called your scope, that's the scope of work. So simply put, that's more of like the project plan, what you intend to do with the property, and it's broken down phase by phase. And I'll show you some of the steps of construction that'll help you develop a scope of work in a little bit. Flipping is a team sport. It is, I don't believe that it's something that can or should really be done on your own. Some of the key people that are involved are an attorney, real estate agent, general contractor, subcontractors, hard money lenders, and a therapist. I'm kidding, but I'm not really with that. Even people that do flip properties on their own, I know people that are general contractors that do the majority of their work on their own. They're still hiring out subcontractors for key things like electrical work and plumbing work. We're always pulling permits for that work and making sure that everything is done by code and signed off on by the town. So even your most skilled, carpenter or general contractor still has some type of a team. Picture on the right, you can see that's me and my dad. We were working on a flip that I did in Canton about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago. And we had just demoed out the whole house, and it's a big old dumpster behind us. So that was fun. So, my dad has helped in a couple of flips, and he's, been part of the team at times, and good way for us to bond and get a little exercise too. Pro tip here, partner to cover your weaknesses. This is a great tip in anything in business. I have a number of different partnerships and a number of different businesses. And what I found is that I'm not the best person to do every single job. A great example, if you're a real estate agent, if that's what your specialty is, you may want to consider partnering with a great contractor, somebody who can, kind of take over the work and run the jobs day to day. I've done flip properties, I've done renovations on my own, and I've also done them in partnerships. And I'm here to tell you that the partnerships are a lot easier. Could do a whole separate video on partnering and choosing partners and what that looks like. Some things that are important to me, though, in partnerships is I have to somebody who's equally dedicated as I am to the project. I think it's important that both parties, or all three parties in some cases, have skin in the game, so they all have some type of financial investment. You want to make sure that you have really clear roles that are defined, so you know who's doing what of what process. And you want to partner with people that are better than you in certain areas. So to give you an example, in one of my partnerships, my buddy Rob and I have worked together for about 2 years. My role is typically finding deals, running the numbers, getting them under contract, negotiating the deals, going kind of contract to close, and then managing some of the process, some of the supply, buying and things like that. And then certainly working on the finished level, the design there, the sales and marketing of the property in the end. And Rob's role is everything that's related to running the project. So he'll source the subcontractors rather. He'll get quotes from them. He'll define the scope of work. He'll manage the day-to-day. He'll keep people on track. He's in charge of buying some of the supplies. Some of the subcontractors are buying some of their supplies. It's all laid out in our scopes of work, but he's really the guy that's operationally getting it done. It's a great partnership that I like to go back to as an example, because Rob has done flips on his own too. He's sourced deals himself. He's listed them on MLS himself. But we basically realized we could do more together than we could apart. Great example in 2020, I tripled my business and did more by partnering 50-50 with Rob. And so I did triple the number of units and more than doubled my profit, even though I was quote unquote giving away half of the deal, 50-50 to one partner. That is absolutely not the right way to look at it, in my opinion. I think if you have the right partner, you both are gaining more and earning more than you otherwise would if you're working alone. Where do I find a deal? I get this question all the time. The simple answer is everywhere. You need to be looking and working everywhere. You need to be working in every single angle to find deals. Some of the common ones are on the MLS, that's the multiple listing service. Yes, there are still some deals to be found on the MLS in this day and age. Sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. You may have to type in your deal criteria and go back and look at expired listings and go back a couple of years to find list to prospect. Sometimes they're active listings. You can go direct to seller. We've done a lot of that. We've marketed in a number of different ways to get in front of sellers who have properties that we'd be interested in buying. We've also worked with a number of different wholesalers. Wholesalers are people whose whole job is to find properties off market, get them under contract, and then resell them or flip the contract to an investor. So somebody might get a property under contract and then sell it to me for 10 grand more, 15 grand more, or whatever than what they got it under contract for. That's called an assignment fee. As long as there's enough profit in it for me at the end of the day, I'm happy to pay somebody to bring me a deal. Referrals are huge. I'm really fortunate to have built a little bit of a name and network. So people know me. They know that I buy rental properties in East Hartford and West Hartford and different parts of Connecticut. They know that I flip properties. So I get agents that call me and say, hey, I have this property that's in really rough condition. It's not something I feel I could sell easily. Is it something you could look at? Do you think you might be interested in buying it? Well, I will always look at that deal. And if it's not something I can buy, I might be able to refer it to another, another industry professional, somebody I know that's in the industry and flipping deals. Or I might be able to refer them to a contractor and help them do a little bit of basic work to kind of get it market ready and help that agent get the property on the market. So definitely use me as a resource, please. I love getting that call. Hey, I have this distressed property and I'm not really sure what to do. Do you want to take a look? Expired listings, I touched on that really briefly. If you put in criteria of properties that that you typically like to buy to flip, you can go and look at deals that have expired in the past. In general, these are sellers that have raised their hand and said, yes, I do want to sell at some point, but they weren't able to. There are some rules and guidelines around that, so just make sure that you know them, you're aware of them if you're an agent. And then another good resource is tired landlords. You may look for ads that have been up to advertise properties for rent for a long time and they haven't gotten a tenant. You may want to look on Craigslist. You may want to go to eviction courts. I personally haven't done that, but I do know people that have bought dozens of units by going to eviction court, kind of noticing the people that are having problems and approaching them after the fact and saying, I understand that you're having problems with some of your tenants. By the way, I'm an investor and, I'd be happy to take that problem off your hands if we can come to terms that work for both of us. Next one, hit deal criteria. It's really important that you know what you're buying as a flipper, or you could risk looking all over the place, not being focused, not having sort of a direct purpose of what you're doing in your deal search. So I've learned over the years to narrow my criteria to markets that I like working in general, I'm flipping in properties that I would live in myself. They have to be relatively close to my house, usually within about 45 minutes or so. That adds some efficiencies, both to the flip and also my other businesses. And, once you get clear on those personal criteria, some criteria that I'll recommend that everybody keep in mind, especially when you're new, is that you always want to be buying the neighborhood norm. That means that you want to buy properties that are common in that area. So in general, ranches, capes, colonials, split levels, raised ranches are all good properties to buy. I would recommend staying away from contemporaries and A-frames and some of those other more unique styles, at least at the beginning, until you get really good with the valuation piece. You have to realize that you have a smaller buyer pool for those less traditional styles of property. I like to look for single families that have at least 3 bedrooms and 1,000+ square feet rather. I will look at deals that are 2 bedrooms and over 1,000 square feet. And I'll look and see if there's a way that I can get a 3rd bedroom in there. That's a really easy way to add value to a property. But in general, 2 bedrooms are going to be harder to sell than 3. Similarly, 6 bedrooms may be harder to sell than 3, 4, and even 5 bedroom properties. I recommend staying out of highly rural and highly urban areas unless you know the market really, really well. I do know people who do well in those types of markets. That's because they know them on a very, kind of intimate level. And what I mean by that is they know the property street by street, or maybe if it's rural, they know it square mile by square mile. It's just important that you have that understanding, because truly, I'll go kind of with the urban example for a second, things can change block by block. And if a property sold for a certain price a half a mile away or even a quarter mile away, the property you're looking at, the ARV may be, after repair value, right, maybe 25% or more lower than that property that's only a quarter of a mile or so away. So you really, really need to know your market well. So that's why in general, when you're newer, I recommend staying away from highly rural and highly urban areas. A few more pieces of criteria. If you're marketing directly to sellers, you want to make sure that you're pulling lists of owners that have equity in the property. If you're trying to get people to sell a home at a discount, they need 2 things in general. They need motivation and they need equity. They need a way to walk away from the property at a lower price and not, kind of get totally hosed. When we market directly to sellers, we're pulling lists for people that we think could have motivation to sell the property at a discount quickly. Our value proposition is that we buy properties cash, quick closing, often with no inspections, and we can cut out a lot of the costs by being agents ourselves. So they're, saving money on the selling costs that they would normally have if they were to go on the MLS. And we're pulling lists that, again, this is a whole other topic I could go into, but there are some indications, like maybe it's a pre-foreclosure list, or it's a list of people that are out-of-state owners. Could be a number of different criteria that you can kind of filter and add into a list. Our job is to solve people's problems. Always keep that in mind. We're always looking for a win-win solution that's fair and equitable to both sides. It's going to solve their problem and provide an opportunity for us to make some money along the way. Always pull your comps and drive your comps, especially if you don't know the market and if you're newer to flipping. I'll go back to that example of working in a more urban environment. When you drive the comps, you'll get a feeling for what the area is like overall, and you may learn differences in blocks and areas that might inform your comps. You may also notice things like a busy highway, which you can see on Google Maps, right? When you're doing the satellite view, when you're searching out your properties. You may notice things that you can't see on Google Maps, or that might not be as readily apparent. Maybe something like power lines that are in the backyard. I've definitely shown properties like that as a buyer's agent, and had clients that are turned off by the fact that there's, these big towers with, wires in the backyard. That's going to affect your value. It's going to minimize your buyer pool. And in general, those properties will sell for less than a property that doesn't have that negative feature, that blight compared to it. I would also encourage you to consider things like flood zones. I have bought properties in flood zones, required flood insurance. You just want to make sure that you're factoring that into your numbers, maybe taking a 5 or 10% discount to what the typical ARV would be for those properties. Also look at PUDs, that's planned to urban developments, HOA fees, especially if you're flipping condos. Just be factoring that into your overall equation and into your holding costs, which is a topic we'll get into a little bit later. Some tips when you're evaluating a deal. These are important, especially when you're new. Especially, I would bring a contractor to the deal if you don't know much about construction. That can be a really good way to learn, and you want to make sure that you're not missing anything. And there's something that a skilled set of eyes will do for you that you just won't be able to do yourself. You want to have a process so you don't miss anything. This is important whether you're new or you're experienced. I'll say for myself, I've fallen victim of not following my own process, not going through my budget sheet and looking at every single item while I'm there. And when I go home and I'm running my numbers, I'm like, geez, you know what? I really didn't evaluate the siding. Might be a good example. I don't know. Do we need to replace, some rotten wood siding? Do we really need to paint it or not? And those could be, pretty decent line items. And so it's important that you have a consistent process that you follow, no matter how much experience you have. Always check for major mechanicals. Look at things like the age of the roof, the condition of the windows, condition of the driveway. You might want to look at the HVAC system. I'm always looking in the electrical panel. I want to see if it looks like it's been updated or if it's rusted out. And I know I'm going to be replacing a panel. In that case, it might be replacing a meter outside. There are some things that are unseen. A couple examples would be septic systems. You can't really visually evaluate a septic system. You may or may not be able to see some indications of if there was at some point an underground oil tank on the property. Really, the only way to know that for sure is by doing an inspection, whether it's a sonar or kind of like, getting a metal bar. I've seen some oil companies do that before. And then radon is another thing to kind of factor in. Radon systems typically aren't that expensive, maybe about $1,500 or so, but just know that that's something you should be thinking about and potentially testing for while you're in the reno process to know. It often is easier to install a radon mitigation system while you're in construction than after the fact when a buyer says, hey, we've got a radon over 4.0 and we want to install a system. When you're buying though, if it is a property that has septic systems, you want to factor that into your numbers. You can do it one of two ways. One is do a septic inspection. We do that. That's the only type of inspection that I do really at this point. But septic can range from $0 to I just got a quote for $31,000. That was a full system replacement for one of my clients. Ouch. The other way you can treat septic is you can budget in what you think it could cost to replace, say, a tank or some of the components. It's pretty common when you get to properties that are 50, 60, 70 years old. It's common to have to replace a tank, or maybe it's baffles or distribution boxes, just because those are some older systems that were built out of concrete in that period, and concrete does degrade over time. Some things to watch out for. I already talked a little bit about underground oil tanks. They're just not for me because they can be anywhere from $3,500 to tens of thousands of dollars to replace. And it's not that taking them out is really all that expensive. That's usually a couple grand. But if there's a leak and oil has seeped into the soil around it, then you have to remediate soil. One interesting little fact is in Connecticut, I've heard that there's only one company that removes contaminated soil from underground oil tanks. They have dump trucks that have been used for this purpose and only this purpose. They can't be used for anything else. So they're able to charge a premium for kind of digging that dirt out and taking it off site, disposing of it properly. So that can get really expensive. Crumbling foundation is a big problem here in Connecticut in certain parts of the state. In certain years that the properties were built, that can get extremely expensive to fix too. It's not something that I've dealt with. I don't, again, this kind of speaks to neighborhood norm in a sec, right? You want something that's going to be a relatively easy flip. Now, easy might still mean I'm spending 100 grand and I'm doing, driveway, windows, siding, roof, HVAC, blah, 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 and a full cosmetic. However, I consider easy something that I can budget and know upfront. If I'm dealing with crumbling foundation, it's extremely hard for me to be able to estimate what the cost to repair that could be. Fire damage is another one that can get very costly. Sometimes fire damage isn't just what you see. You may see a couple of joists that are burned above the stove, but fire, could have traveled up and through the walls and it could have burned a whole bunch of joists in there. So you could be stuck rebuilding a vast majority of the second floor and not even know it because it was burned from down below from the stove. So, if you're going to flip a property that has fire damage, definitely work with somebody who knows what they're doing, who can carefully evaluate that and give you a good cost estimate up front. Be careful with the following. I already kind of touched on septic. Another one to be careful with, a couple other examples are you want to check the sill plates. You want to poke them with a long screwdriver and see if any of them are soft or weak. The sill plate is, if you're in the basement, you have the foundation, right? So it might be concrete, brick, whatever the case is. There's a wooden, generally it's a 2x6 that's sitting horizontal on the foundation, and then all the studs are built on top of that. The sill plate is this horizontal part, and that's where you'll typically see water damage and termite damage. So you want to get a long screwdriver and kind of poke that at several points to see if anything feels weak. Not the end of the world if they are compromised. You jack up that part of the building and you replace those boards. It is something that's a little bit more advanced. So, if you're doing your first flip or two, I would recommend not taking that on, or making sure that you're working with a contractor that is really skilled in that area and can give you a lockdown quote on that they can commit to before they do the work. You don't want to have any surprises in your reno costs. I look for aluminum wiring. That's something that most insurance companies don't want to insure on. Yes, there are companies that will do it, but they do charge a premium. If I find aluminum wiring in a flip deal that I'm looking at, I'm planning on replacing all the wiring in that house. Again, it's something that's doable. I would take it on as long as there's enough room in the budget to allow for a full replacement. And then you also want to be looking for signs of water intrusion and mold. This could be anywhere. It could be in the basement. It could be, near doorways. It could be near windows. You want to make sure that if you find that you're budgeting for replacement of maybe it's like a wooden door that's been rotted out at the bottom of the kitchen. You want to plan to replace that door and also pull apart, sheetrock in sections around it, and plan that you're going to, potentially have to remediate for mold and replace sheetrock, maybe some studs and things like that. So again, these are just some of the, potential pitfalls that you want to look for and budget for if you do see them. Next, I want to touch on some rules of thumb, and these are some of the financial metrics that you want to look at when you're evaluating a flip deal. A couple definitions. I'll take us back to the very first page, or one of the first pages, where we talked about the MAO and the ARV. MAO is your maximum allowable offer. So basically, that's the highest that you can or should offer on a property, where it's where you'd be comfortable buying the property at an absolute maximum to make the deal still worth doing. Your after repair value, another way of thinking about this, is your sales price. It's what you're going to sell the property for at the end of the day. A good rule of thumb with ARV is that you want to comp the property. You want to find similar properties that have sold recently. There's a whole methodology for comping. Again, that's a whole other training probably. I generally speaking will use an ARV that's about 90% of what the comps come out to. So I'll give you a great example. The property that's in this picture is 18 Vanderbilt in West Hartford, biggest project we've ever done. Beautiful home, 5-bed, 3.5 bath, quartz, granite, everything, totally decked out. This property, we estimated to be worth potentially like around 500 grand or so when we sold it. But in my model, I went off of $450,000. We ended up selling it for $525,000, which was awesome. You can do the math. We did much better than we expected. But it's always better to be conservative on the buy side. You make your money when you buy the deal. To calculate your MAO, your maximum allowable offer, a good rule of thumb is that you take your ARV, after repair value, times 70%. Then you subtract the rehab costs, and that'll give you your MAO. So a good example here, let's say you have an ARV of 200 grand, you multiply that by 70%, that gives you 140,000. I had this math mistake in last time I did this presentation, and I forgot to fix it. The math here should be 140 grand minus a $50,000 reno would be an MAO of 90 grand, not 80. But I guess I had a conservative mind when I was building this presentation, but I will fix that later. Couple more rules of thumb. It's helpful to have rules of thumb for estimating construction costs, but I always recommend that you make a detailed budget and that you buy using that detailed budget. So when I'm running numbers on a deal, my numbers are a little bit different than this. My construction costs are typically less than $40 or $45 per square foot. I think that's a good, decent starting point for a new flipper. I'm using the rule of thumb only to see if the deal is worth me going out and looking at in the first place, though. I'm always going to walk the property with my detailed list and budget out line by line what I think everything is going to cost. And then I have a 10% contingency and extra buffer of costs built into my model, just for some wiggle room and some error there. You want to follow a scope of work. And you want to, I recommend using handouts about construction steps when you're newer. I've got a couple pictures of diagrams that I'd recommend. There's an awesome book. It's called Flip. It's by Gary Keller. It's one of the first books I read when I was starting flipping properties and renovating some of my rental properties. It has some really good diagrams that explain this construction process and break down in order what you should do. Those are coming up in a bit. A couple more rules of thumb though. The numbers never lie. You don't want to fall in love with the deal. You don't want to find yourself saying, well, if I change this in my budget, then it works. If you're finding yourself doing that, you probably shouldn't buy the deal. For example, if you're budgeting $5,000 for something, I'm sorry, if you think something should cost $8,000, you say, well, I could probably get it done for $5,000. And you change it from 8 to 5 in the model, and that $3,000 is sort of like make or break territory for you, you're probably buying a thin deal. So I would really start to reevaluate that. Same thing goes on the comp side. We just walked away from a property in South Windsor. That was a really hard one to walk away from. It was a single family ranch with an in-law attached to it. That was another ranch. And we felt pretty good about what we had as the ARV based on what we found in terms of comps. There just wasn't really a whole lot to comp it by. But we felt like it could potentially go higher than that because in-laws are desirable as are ranches in that particular market. We found ourselves having conversations of, well, you know, if we buy it with this ARV, we would make X, but you know, if we really home run this thing, we could make X plus 30 grand. 30 grand more sounds good, but we found that we were sort of relying on that 30 grand in our minds to make the deal attractive and make it something we were excited about. It took us talking about it a lot and you know, me and Rob kicking it around quite a bit to realize that maybe we were fitting a square peg in a round hole because we wanted to do a deal. So we ultimately walked away from it. There are deals, I'll say this quickly too. There are deals that we walk away from that we know, you know, guys will make money on. We know that there are people out there that will do the flip. There are definitely people that can do work less expensively than we can. We have a certain model that we like to follow. We delegate out almost all the work. And that works well for us. We could have multiple jobs and, you know, and we both have separate businesses that we can run too. So there are people that can definitely make money on deals that we can't, or there are also people that are happy taking less income. There are people that are, you know, perfectly happy making 15, 20 grand on the deal. For us though, we have our buying criteria and we know that since we're splitting things 50-50, we want to make at least 30 grand on what would be, you know, what we consider an easy quick flip, which would be like a 6, 8, maybe 10 weeker. If it's a bigger deal like that, you know, big guy I showed you in West Hartford, we need to make a lot more money to make that worth it because that was, I mean, it was nearly half a year of renovation. Quick word on backup strategies. You always want to make sure you have a backup strategy for anything you buy. You want to ask yourself, if I can't sell this property, or if I can't sell it for a number that I like, can I rent it? What do the numbers look like? Could I wholesale the property? Is it something that I might consider living in? Having a tight model though, and a really tight cost estimating process will help you avoid going to your plan B though. At the end of the day, you want to execute your business plan. So if you're buying a property, planning to flip it, you want to go through with a flip. The backup strategy is just that. It's only a backup in case something happens. We always have a backup strategy, but fortunately we haven't had to go to it because our flips have always worked out. We've always done really well on them. A couple rules for managing a flip. This property, this is 18 Ichabod in Simsbury, I believe. This was a fun one. This was a, man, it's getting hard to remember. This one was a raised ranch. We took out a wall here between the kitchen and the living room, made it a nice open concept like you can see. And then we cut in some recessed lighting. This was a really fun project. It was a nice, easy, kind of quick one. But a couple rules for managing the flip. You want to hire slow and fire fast. What that means is that you have to have confidence in your team. At the end of the day, that's what that really means. So spend time really getting to know the trades that you're going to be working with, get on the same page, develop scopes of work, talk everything out, walk the scope of work to make sure everybody is confident that we're not missing anything. If you have somebody who's not working out though, don't be afraid to pull the trigger and fire that person. It can be very stressful to have to part ways with somebody if you're mid-rehab. We've done it a number of times. In fact, we've done it on, I hate to say, probably nearly every project we've done. There seems to be an expiration time for trades. We'll work with somebody, it's great for like a year and a half or 2 years, and all of a sudden they'll do something crazy. And you say, man, well, we really can't work with this person anymore. Don't be afraid to make that call, though. You can always find somebody else that may add a week or two to your renovation schedule, but you're going to be better served in the long run if you have somebody who you know is committed to the job and is going to do quality work and see it through all the way. You want to make sure with that when you're hiring people, you have a clear expectation on a payment schedule. So when we do have to terminate and part ways with a contractor or a subcontractor, we have always, fortunately, been in a situation where we paid for some of the work that they've completed, but not all of it. You don't want to prepay for anything because that's how you could get burned, or you don't want to prepay too far in advance, I should say. So it's relatively common for us to pay 25% or so of the total bid upfront so they can get started and buy materials. Then as different stages are completed by the electrician, then they'll get payments. So for example, once they finish the rough electrical, they'll get paid maybe another 25% of what their total invoice will be. So we're always paying for work that has been completed, not future work. And that's how you keep yourself from getting burned. There are a lot of stories out there of contractors burning investors and homeowners, and that's just one way to stay out of that situation, in addition to having a really good scope of work and a good contract with your subcontractors that backs up that scope of work and explains the payment schedule and explains who's buying what material. That helps avoid a lot of debates and problems that you could have down the road. One tip for finding contractors, I would recommend not hiring the contractor with the $70,000 truck. You also don't want to hire the person that has the $7,000 truck. And the $70,000 truck person is probably driving that because they have a business that's generating a lot of gross profit. Good for them. Typically doesn't really work in the flip model, though, when you're looking for good work done at a good, fair price. The person with the $7,000 truck, you don't want somebody who is maybe kind of running on too thin of a margin, too thin of a line. This is the person that might always be asking you for money every single week. Like, oh, I need some money to buy 2x4s. And you're thinking, well, that's in the scope of work as being your responsibility, part of your quote. So I shouldn't be paying you for basic construction materials. That's not what we agreed on. You're more likely to have that with somebody that's, kind of running a rougher operation, and just sort of the truck is one way that you can get a snapshot of that. Another good tip, if you meet people, well, let me go to this example first. A great tip is to go to Home Depot at 6 a.m. or whenever it is that they open in your local market. Go to the pro desk and look for people that are there buying and checking out with the materials that they'll need for the day. In general, these are going to be people that are organized, that have a plan for their day, and they're likely not the contractors that are running out 3 times a day to buy, screws that they forgot and drill bits that they lost and stuff like that. You want to look for modest people that work really hard. You want to look for people that are going to be a good personality match for you too. Even if you're not partnered in an equity basis on the deal, even if you're not buying into it together, you are still partnering with your general contractors, and you're going to be working really closely with them if you're running your job correctly. Couple management rules. I always like to have a must, should, and a could list. This kind of ties into the finish level and what I'm planning on doing with a property. Your musts are going to be things that are sort of safety, structural. You would do this no matter what type of property it is. Your shoulds are things that are required for that neighborhood norm. So if it's a requirement that every home in that area has, will be a good example. Maybe every home in that area has hardwood floors that have been recently refinished and they have an open concept. Well, guess what? Then you're doing that. That though may be on your could list with certain property types. Maybe you're flipping a cheaper property and that's really not the norm for the area. And it's something you could do, but you don't need to do. You always want to make sure that you establish your scope of work and your finish level ahead of time and don't deviate from that. Get it down in writing. You want to have your scope of work, your quote, your terms of payment, your contract, all that stuff outlined ahead of time before you start working with somebody. You want to define things like who's going to be picking up supplies, You want to decide things like the tile type and the grout color and the paint color and things like that. You don't want to leave those decisions typically to the contractor. That's something you want to control, because at the end of the day, you have a vision for what the property needs to look like to hit your ARV at the end of the day. So if they have kind of free reign to pick out supplies, they might, pick something that's not really consistent with what your vision is, and that could affect your sales price. And you want to talk to your people daily, probably multiple times per day. Here is one graphic from that book, Flip by Gary Keller. Like I said, excellent book. Definitely pick up a copy. These are the should do's based on different design and finish levels that you could have. So, whether it's a basic finish level, standard, designer, or custom, this list goes on for pages and pages. But a quick example, for example, if you look at the front door, a metal 6-panel might be expected for a basic level flip, where you may need a custom door with, a custom wood door with glass for a custom level flip. This next slide is a list of the must-dos. Like I said, these are sort of safety and structural type things. So you're, going to make sure your windows close and lock, and that you don't have any signs of active termites, fleas, roaches. You want to make sure there's no junk in the yard, et cetera, et cetera. This list goes on for 3 pages as well. I just wanted to show you a quick example of it. This is another really helpful graphic from that same book. These are the 50 steps of rehabbing a house, and they're broken down into 6 stages. Your first stage is pre-construction. Stage 2 is rough construction, 3 major systems, 4 the unfinished surfaces, 5 the finished surfaces, and then 6 the final details. This is a really helpful kind of roadmap to walk through. You may have some things that you don't need to do in the property, but you want to make sure that you're kind of looking at every single step and saying, step number 24, masonry. Do I have anything that I need to be doing for this? This is really helpful, especially when you're getting into estimating, when you're new to looking at deals. This will help you really look at the property ground up. All right, common issues. This gets fun. Some of the common problems you can have, all these are math related. So some common ones are overestimating your ARV, underestimating your rehab costs, not building into your budget costs for the financing, the purchase of the property, and the holding costs that go with it, not accounting for buying and selling costs and scope creep. I'm going to break down that financing cost and the buying and selling costs in a little bit here on a different slide. Some other common issues, this is more from like a management standpoint. You're juggling a lot. You could have contractor problems in a couple of different ways. You could have a project that's running too long. That's pretty common. You could have a long lead time for materials. We've seen that with COVID. We've had to order some supplies and parts at the very beginning of the job that normally we'd wait until we're partway through. You could have scheduling issues. It's common that one trade is dependent on the work of another happening before them. So if trade A is slow to do something, it may mess up trade B and delay their schedule. Another common issue is being overly involved. You could be the bottleneck in the construction stages. You could also be under involved where you're not managing the process enough. I'll give you a quick example of being overly involved. I had one project where I was, this is one that I was managing on my own, kind of subbed out the work to guys on their own, and bought the deal and had most of my subs figured out. I didn't have my painter figured out. I got some quotes. The timing ended up being an issue where our normal painter wasn't available. So I had somebody else do the painting work. I really didn't like what they were doing. So I stepped in and did some painting myself. Well, then I realized that I was just taking too long. So what I ended up having to do was get rid of the painter that I'd hired, find a whole new painter to kind of take over, somebody who's faster, neater, does better quality work, and he kept the deal on track rather than me trying to invest a couple weeks realistically painting the property, because I still had a full sales business and a whole bunch of other stuff going on that I couldn't take time away from. Being under involved is a big problem too. You want to make sure you go into your project probably at least, let's say, minimum 2-3 times per week, more at the beginning of the project, and also more when you're new to the flipping process in general. Some ways to win with flipping. On the buying side, don't buy thin deals. I think I hopefully have made this point already. Good tip is that you find the deal and then you find the money to finance it. If it really is a good deal, somebody's going to want to fund it. If your hard money lender is looking at the deal and they say, gee, I really don't think that you have the reno cost right, or I think that you're overestimating on the ARV, listen to them. I've heard stories on podcasts of people that have heard that before from their hard money lenders. They say, no, it's going to be fine. They find money from another source, then they end up losing money on the deal. So watch out for that one. Hiring, like I said before, hire slow, fire fast. Yes, I know I'm repeating myself here. This one is so important. You want to make sure that you're doing good work. Your reputation is all you have in this industry. You want to have systems too. You want to make sure that you have a repeatable process. Rarely will we deviate from the package that we do. So we have the same type, the same paint color, same type of tile, the same type of cabinets, the same vanities, the same faucets. We want to churn and burn quality rehabs. Now, if we're doing something that's out of price point, that's if we're doing something that's like what, 150 to 300 grand, right? We could do pretty much the same thing and deliver a great product. Well, if we're doing a $500,000 house, that's going to have to look different. And we can have some fun and get creative and do quartz and black stainless steel appliances, all kinds of fun stuff. But that's not our norm. That's not our kind of typical business model. Staging is a huge part of flipping a property and selling it for the maximum amount possible. It does a couple things. It improves the first impression online when people are looking through the pictures. It also creates a warm and inviting environment for showings. Buyers pay attention to the house more when there's furniture in it, and they're more likely to oversee small dings and imperfections, and maybe that one wall that you didn't really skim coat properly and fix to make perfectly smooth if you have furniture in it. And then, of course, just a sales tip, it's going to make it easier for that buyer to envision themselves living in their property. And that's what you ultimately want to do. At the end of the day, you're selling somebody a home, you're selling them, a lifestyle in a way. So the more you can convey that through high quality work, great finish level, and good staging, the better off you'll be. A quick word on negotiation. This could probably be a whole other class in and of itself. One thing I found is that negotiating your sale is just different. It's harder. And I've talked to other flippers about it. I've talked to other agents who've, sold their own home and moved to another one. You just end up more emotionally involved because it's the property that you worked on for 10 weeks and you've got blood, sweat, and tears in it, or it's your family home that you've lived in for 5 years. And you might get that feeling that a lot of sellers have, oh my gosh, well, no, my home can't be worth that, it's worth more. And as you're going back and forth negotiating, it's often helpful to have a trusted agent who's involved. And you also want to have a second opinion, a second point of view. I usually have 2 or 3 second opinions. I'll engage with David, my team leader and mentor, and then also Bob, who's my mentor on the investing front, and run things by them. They just help you look at things more objectively. It's called a flip for a reason. Our jobs are to get in and get out. We don't want to hold properties for long periods of time. At the end of the day, that ends up holding your holding costs. You end up having your financing costs go up. You make less return, and it ties up capital that you can't use for another deal. Always remember that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Bob says this all the time. You want to do well, and have a deal that has good margin on it, but you don't want to get greedy because that's how you can get in trouble. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. Really quickly, I want to run you through an example of a deal that doesn't work. This property, these are a couple screenshots from my spreadsheet. This was a property I looked at maybe about a year ago. It had an ARV of 190,000. That might be a little conservative. Maybe it was more like 200 or 210, but I felt good putting 190 in the model. We were talking about buying the property for 100,000. The seller had some debts that they needed to pay off, so that was really about their bottom line. Went through and budgeted 52 grand for the reno. I carried a 10% contingency. So the total cost was 58,000 or so for the reno. Now, if you look at that quickly, you say, okay, 190 minus 100 minus 58 should lead to what? 32 grand in profit, right? That would be a deal you do, right, Lou? Well, no, it's not. The numbers, the way they actually shook out, we were planning on selling it for 190. We were actually going to be all in for 184. Not 158, and I'll show you why in a second. So our profit only would have been about $6,000. Now I could have said to myself, well, this property would actually probably sell for 200 or 210. but that would be that justification mindset that you really just don't want to get into, because then you're going to put more stress on yourself. This is the added cost that you didn't see in that first slide. These are your financing and holding costs, often called your carry costs, and then your transactional costs for buying and selling at the bottom. So some of the carrying costs that we were estimating a 6-month hold period total. So we'd have probably about 3 months to renovate it, and then typically about 1.5 months or 2 months to sell it. But 6 months is pretty common for an easy rehab for us to budget. We had city taxes. Half a year would be, the annual is $3,500, so half a year would be $1,750. I threw in $1,000 for permits. I know that's high. You can see a budget for utilities, insurance, loan interest. Again, that hard money lender was charging 1% per month. So that's a big part of our expense there, $7,600. That led to carrying costs of $12,250. Down below, we have some transactional costs that are involved. We have costs from the attorney when we buy and sell the property. We have a lending charge. At that time, we were paying 3% to our hard money lender. So that's $3,800. We had costs to sell it on the attorney side. On the marketing and paying the buyer's agent, we were looking at paying them 2.5% commission. Plus, I also build in money for pictures and staging that we'd be paying for. Now, I mean, we're saving money by me not being by me being an agent. I'm saving 2.5%, so it's saving another $4,800 of expense that you would have if you're not an agent. You can't list things on your own. Then we also have conveyance tax on the sales side as well, so that's another 14 grand. Now, if you look at it, a good example on why some people can do deals that we can't. They may not have hard money costs. They may not have costs that are that high. They have, so again, in our model, we have like $7,600 for interest and another 38 or so for points, which are the lending fees up front. Quick math, I don't know, it's like 11 grand, 11,500 or so. That's pretty significant. Another thing I'll say is if you do need to buy with a loan and you can get better loan terms, definitely try to. We've done a number of things like seller financing. We've gotten, we've done private deals where we've paid people less money, and that's helped our profit margins too. Really quickly, we'll talk about scaling your business. You absolutely need systems if you're going to do this at scale. You need something that's repeatable. You don't have a business if you don't have systems, and if you can't repeat the process pretty easily. Partners are highly recommended. I already talked about that a little bit. I gave you a couple tips earlier on for finding partners. I don't know if I stress this enough. You have to make sure you like working with your partners. My partners on everything I do, we're friends first and then business partners later. And I just feel like that's the right order to do things in. They're people I like hanging out with and spending time with anyway. So they're people that I like being in business with. It's good to have backup trades. Like I mentioned, you may have an electrician that you work with for 1.5 years and they're all good until they're not. And then you have to part ways with that person midway through the project and get somebody else in. So it's good to have backups and just good to know multiple people in the trades and all the different, different fields that you need. Deal flow is really important. That's often the hardest thing for any investor, is making sure that you have an adequate number of deals coming in. So that way you should be finishing one project as you're starting the next, or in some cases, we've had 4 renovations going at one time, but they've all been in different, well, ideally they're all at different stages. It doesn't always pan out that way with when closings happen, but in a perfect world, you can move one crew from one to the other. So your sheetrockers at property A, and then they go to property B and C, and then they're right followed by, by the painters and going through the process. But you want to have a pipeline. If not, it's pretty common that you will do one flip, wait a couple months, do another flip, and you maybe do 2 a year. That's not bad, and that's a very valid business model too. But if you want to do it at scale, you have to really work on that deal pipeline, and you want to be working all deal sources all the time. Of course, you need capital to do this at scale. You need kind of the money to fund the deals. Like I said before, though, if you find a good deal, you will be able to find financing for it. If you find a good deal, call me. I'm always happy to, pay people for a deal as a wholesale fee. In some cases, I might partner with you. I could find investors for you. There are a number of different ways that I can help you get a deal done if it really is a good deal. And then, of course, you need grit. It's not easy. This isn't HGTV. It's not glitzy and glammy and sexy. as it may appear on TV. There are road bumps that even the most experienced people experience, and you need to have some kind of mental fortitude to really be able to work through those. A couple additional resources. Please don't sign up for a $10,000 class. I found that you can learn most of what you need to, online from YouTube videos, from legitimate people. You can learn from books and podcasts, and you can learn from mentors, people like myself. HGTV is not an education resource. It's not real life. A couple different resources that I do recommend is the Bigger Pockets podcast and website. I also recommend a couple books. Flip by Gary Keller. I know I've talked about that one a few times. Definitely pick that one up if you're interested in learning more. There's also a book called The Book on Flipping Houses by Jay Scott. It was published by Bigger Pockets. Jay's done this at a high level for a long time. He's done hundreds of flips. So he really has this dialed in, has some great guidance in that book. I think he has a podcast at this point too. I know he's been on the Bigger Pockets podcast a number of times. Guy's a wealth of knowledge. And then lastly, me. Use me as a resource. If you're watching this, you have my contact info. It is on the first slide and the very next one here. So please call me, email me, text me if you have questions. Definitely, if you have a deal, reach out. If you need help running numbers or funding a deal or anything like that, I'm always happy to help. So those are the basics on flipping properties. Like I said, we can go deep on a lot of different topics, but I'm hoping that this is at least a good entry point, a good starting place for you. You may have some skill sets already. Maybe you're a general contractor and you already know a lot about the construction process. You can kind of breeze through that part, but you may need to work on sort of sourcing deals and estimating the ARV and parts like that. I would suggest that you use this presentation as an outline and a tool to help inform further learning if it is something you think you want to move forward with. Flipping's a ton of fun. It's not always easy, but it is always rewarding if you're buying the right deals and if you're doing quality work. I want to open it up to a couple of questions. I see a couple in the chat. Sebi asked, he said, I caught the end of this. Will you be sending a replay? Absolutely. I will send out a recording of this, and I'll send out a couple of resources like some of those diagrams, my model, and some other things that you can check out later. Go ahead and shout them out though. If anybody else has questions, go ahead and jump in.
Can we get a copy of that slide?
Which one of this? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll I'll ask Katie to send out like a PDF of the slide deck too, so you see everything.
For the hard money lender, how much do they require you to put down on the overall project if you're doing your first flip? Because I know if you're new, they kind of might require you to pay a premium just because, they're taking a risk.
Yeah, that's right. So the typical for hard money lenders, usually they're requiring 20% down. They'll charge 3%, 3 points up front, and 12 percentage points in interest. If you're newer, they may require 25% down. If you're more experienced, we've been able to do deals with hard money lenders that are 15% down, 1.8% interest. It all really just depends on the lender and what experience you have. If you've helped with other projects or you've worked in construction, something like that, then you may be able to get some better terms. It's really important that you're communicating your resume to the hard money lender. That way they can evaluate you, because they're investing in the house and they're investing in you at the end of the day. He said, the market's different than when Jay Scott first published this book. Have you seen a newer version? That's a great question. So I didn't call out Jay's other book, which is the book on estimating rehab costs, because that one is about 10 years old or so. It is, things are drastically different from then. I think I heard they're putting out a new version. I don't know if I've seen it. I haven't been the best on Bigger Pockets lately, to be honest with you. I've been kind of listening to some other stuff. There's really not going to be anything better than getting quotes and, kind of going out and doing it on your own and meeting with people. Another good tip would be meeting with other investors. When I was newer, I did a lot of networking in just local Facebook groups, and I met a couple of people at some of the flips they were doing, and I came with a list of questions, and brought them donuts and coffee, and they were more than willing to answer my questions. All right, what else? Who else has questions? Just go ahead and throw them out. Yes, go ahead, Cynthia.
Okay. So why should I go with the hard money lenders if they charge? You said that the interest rate is higher, right?
Yep.
But if they will require me to put 20-25% down, why can I just go to a regular mortgage lender, right? Because if I own a property, I know I can't go FHA, right? So I have to go conventional. And conventional, they require 20-25% down. So if hard money lender is asking me to put 20-25% down, then I can just go to regular, mortgage people and get 20-25% down with the lower interest rate, right? Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the lender and on the loan product. Actually. So a lot of conventional lenders will require you to own or occupy the property. That is a strategy in and of itself, though. I know people that they typically call it house hacking, where they buy a property with an owner occupied loan. They live in it for a year or two. Maybe they could be an FHA loan, 3.5% down, could be conventional, 5, 10, 20% down. Those are all going to come with lower interest rates than a hard money lender would. But it comes down to the loan terms at the end of the day, and whether or not, if you can get a conventional loan and they don't make you owner occupy the property, then yeah, I would go that route for sure. I haven't really seen it, but anybody can money.
Yeah, because the conventional loan with 20-25% down, you'll buy it as an investment property, so they don't require you to, live there. So
give me that phone number. If you got somebody who's doing that, I would love to for sure.
thank you.
So cool. What other questions you guys have?
For the deal flow and like the lead sources, what would you say is like your kind of favorite and like trackable sources of getting leads? Like is it like direct mail, the texting, cold calling?
Yep. So getting direct to sellers is always going to be best. My favorite lead source is referrals. My second favorite would be going direct to sellers. We were doing a lot of text messaging marketing and had some good success with that. We have done, there's some rules that you want to make sure that you're following, that you're aware of. We can talk offline about that. We've had good success with cold calling. I bought a deal in February of this year, I think it was, from a mailer, and I have not sent mailers in probably 2 years or so. So this guy kept the postcard for a year and then ultimately was willing to sell his multifamily property and gave us a call. And that worked out. It was an amazing deal. So it's interesting because different types of outreach opportunities have different pros and cons that come with it. And direct mail can have sort of like an evergreen component where, they might just keep that postcard for a long time and have it in the desk drawer until the day that they decide to call you. There are some people that are really successful with pay-per-click marketing. I haven't done much with that. I've heard that it can get really expensive and it can be a rabbit hole if you really don't know what you're doing, but certainly the internet is a valid lead source for sure. Door knocking is another good one. Isaiah, I remember, so you went to talk about it Tuesday, a couple weeks back, and I'm not sure if you caught it, but Jake and Tyler were talking about a deal that they door knocked. They got a great deal by looking for a distressed property and just going up and doing the hey mister and talking to the owner. All right, awesome. Any other questions before I wrap us up for the day?
Just want to say thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate all you guys coming. We had a good audience today, and it's always fun to get to, kind of share the knowledge and pay it forward a little bit. So I'm here as a resource for you. Anytime, you have any questions on investing or agent stuff in general, whether it's, building a team as an agent or, selling more properties as an agent or building a team as an investor or managing rental properties. I've done a little bit of a lot of things, I'll say, or maybe a lot of things. And I'm happy to share my knowledge. So take down my number, take down my email. Hope to hear from you soon.